Did you know that you can destroy your startup's ability to attract investors or to achieve a solid exit based on decisions that you and your co founders make, or, better said, don't make right now? And this problem will have nothing to do with how good your tech or products are, how solid your team is, and how hard you all work. I'm Jackie Hutter, a globally recognized IP strategy expert, and I work with startups to design and deploy intellectual property strategies that can create real business value. In this presentation, I'm going to walk you through what I call the startup IP ownership trap, how unstructured early-stage collaboration quietly creates ownership risk, why patent law makes that risk more serious than most new startup founders understand, how investors and acquirers evaluate it during due diligence, and the straightforward steps you can take to prevent it happening. If you are building something you believe could scale, this is a conversation worth having now, not later. Let's get started. Some of the most damaging problems in startups do not begin with bad technology or ineffective product development. They begin with unclear ownership. And most founders don't realize they are creating that risk on day one. Startups almost always begin the same way. A small group of capable, ambitious people come together around an idea. There is energy, there is trust, there is speed. You build quickly, you test, you pivot, you iterate. What you do not usually do is stop and define who owns the intellectual property being created. Because at that stage, it feels premature. There is no revenue, no investors, just momentum. So ownership conversations get deferred. Documentation gets postponed. Structure is treated as something to address when this becomes real. But here's the straight talk. Ownership of valuable technology or products exists the moment innovation is created. Ownership issues do not wait until you incorporate. Ownership issues do not wait until you are ready to file a patent. And ownership issues certainly do not wait until you are ready to raise capital or find an acquirer. As a startup founder, you need to know that when ownership is not properly structured from the beginning, risk and uncertainty can follow your company for years, surfacing at exactly the wrong time. Before you build a startup with others, whether it is a co-founder, technical consultant, or some person you vibed with at a recent hackathon, you should plan the breakup. That may sound pessimistic. It's not. It's realistic. I've worked with dozens of startups, and here's what I can tell you. The people who are there at the birth of a company have a very low probability of being there when that company scales. Founder turnover isn't rare, it's normal. People's goals change, risk tolerance changes, life circumstances change. Sometimes skills just don't scale with the business. And when a founder leaves, most of the time it doesn't end in a dramatic lawsuit. It ends in something quieter and often more dangerous. Shared ownership, lingering rights, unresolved claims, unclear control. If you think that only happens to massive companies, it doesn't. Before Facebook was Facebook, it was just young guys collaborating in a dorm room. No one believed they were building a global platform. But years later, that informal, early-stage collaboration turned into one of the most famous ownership conflicts in startup history. And that dispute didn't start in a courtroom. It started when nobody thought they were building something worth fighting over. That's how most startups begin. Maybe it's over drinks. Maybe it's with a colleague. Maybe it's a technical expert and a business development professional who work together at a company deciding they're done building someone else's dream. Smart people, complementary skills, high energy, fast execution, constant pivots. And at that stage, nobody wants to slow down and say, let's define who owns what. There's no revenue, no investors, no obvious asset, just momentum. So structure gets postponed, documentation gets delayed. Ownership conversations feel awkward, almost distrustful. I see this constantly. Momentum wins over structure. But here's the truth. Ownership is being created whether you formalize it or not. Beyond dealing with important legal issues, having the breakup conversation early also tells you something important about the people you're building with. If someone hesitates to assign rights to the company from the beginning, that's valuable information. Structure doesn't signal distrust, it signals seriousness. The real problems don't start when someone leaves. They start because you never defined what leaving means. And when that departure finally happens, the IP ownership may already be locked in. Make sure you don't destroy your startup's future by avoiding dealing with hard issues now. How can the IP ownership trap be devastating for startups? When a co-founder or early collaborator leaves, most teams assume the problem is solved. They think, they're gone, we're moving forward. Operationally, maybe. Legally, not necessarily. Here's the question almost no one asks early enough. What do they still legally own after they've left the company? Because if that person contributed to a product offering, especially the technical parts that could underpin a patent filing, their ownership does not automatically disappear just because they walked away. And this is where founders get blindsided. Under US law, intellectual property rights do not automatically belong to the startup just because everyone was collaborating under the same vision. They belong to the individuals who actually created the underlying innovation, unless those rights were properly assigned to the company. That's a critical distinction. No legally binding assignment means no company ownership. Let's unpack this important issue more. If a co-founder or early collaborator helped design core product features, contributed to the architecture, developed algorithms, or solved technical problems that are embedded in your product, those rights may belong to them personally, not emotionally, not morally, not based on who worked harder, because the law says it belongs to them. And if there was no clear written assignment of those rights to the company at the outset, you don't just lose a teammate when they leave. You may have created a co-owner of your most valuable asset, and that co-owner may no longer be aligned with your company's success. The ownership and lack of alignment can become very real the moment you start a due diligence phase that is a critical part of investment or acquisition discussions and the associated valuation of your company. This occurs when investors ask who owns the IP before they agree to give you the capital you need to build the company. Because the question investors ask isn't, why did they leave? They need to know, what parts of the startup does this person still control, even though they are not around anymore? And when we move specifically into patents, where ownership rules are even stricter, the stakes get significantly higher. Let's talk about why. It should now be clear that if you are planning to raise money, you have to know how your departed co-founders or technical collaborators' ownership might hurt your chances with investors. Because once investors or potential acquirers get involved, everything gets more complicated. During fundraising, especially institutional fundraising, investors run due diligence. The same thing happens when another company may be looking at acquiring your startup. And one of the first things they look at is, who owns the intellectual property? To find this out, we'll ask for relevant legal documents like IP assignment agreements, founder agreements, employment agreements, patent filing paperwork. These documents will give the legally sufficient confirmation that all inventors have assigned rights to the company, so that the startup in fact owns the patent rights upon which the investor is basing the valuation. If there is a gap, even a small one, it becomes a red flag. And in a competitive fundraising or acquisition environment, you should assume that an IP ownership red flag will mean that you don't get a follow-up meeting with a previously curious investor or potential acquirer. Why? Because investors and acquirers aren't just looking to have access to the revenue that can be generated from the technology and products that your team has created that customers will buy at scale. They're investing in the right to have exclusive access to the revenue that existing and new customers will generate when your company's protected technology and products scale. In other words, they don't want to have to share the market with other companies because to do so would dilute the value of their investment or acquisition. If a former co-founder or former collaborator of your startup is legally a joint patent owner, they could license their patent rights to a competitor. They could block certain strategic transactions. They could demand compensation later. Even if they never act on it, the risk exists, and investors price risk. At best, this means delayed closing, extra legal cleanup, negotiation leverage shifting away from you. At worst, it means lower valuations, a restructuring requirement before funding, or the investor may even walk away entirely. In acquisition scenarios, it's even stricter. Buyers want clean IP ownership, period. If there's co-ownership ambiguity, the deal may be repriced, require escrow holdbacks, or collapse entirely. So what feels like a minor early-stage oversight can become a material financial issue years later. Investors and acquirers don't like surprises, and unclear IP ownership is one of the biggest surprises you can hand them. One of the biggest misconceptions I see among early-stage founders is this. They believe they need expensive, perfectly customized legal work before they can protect themselves. Of course, this perceived expense can turn startup founders off from getting the right documents in place. But legal perfection is not needed in a very early stage startup that is based on an idea because no customers or revenue yet exist. This means that at the earliest stages of your startup, what you need is structure, not perfection. First, form the business entity before meaningful technical development begins. Don't build valuable intellectual property inside an informal collaboration that has no legal structure. Second, use form documents that will address most basic legal issues that arise with very early stage startups. The good news is that basic protection does not need to cost so much that you can't get your startup off the ground. But you do need to have some protection, even at the beginning. Where should you look for a basic set of legal documentation that can stop the startup IP ownership trap from catching your company? Many reputable law firms, incubators, accelerators, and university programs provide standard form documents for free. Find them and use them. Are they flawless? No. Certainly, they won't address unique issues that arise in many startups, but most very early stage startups aren't that different from other very early stage startups. In short, the issues that these free, self-help legal resources are designed to address are probably pretty close to the legal issues your startup will be facing in the near term. Are these free or low-cost startup legal documents dramatically better than nothing? Absolutely. Also, while you can expect to pay most law firms if you need one-on-one assistance, startup incubators, accelerators, and university programs will often have experienced mentors available for free to help you navigate the basics of startup legal documentation requirements. From my own experience, I can attest to the fact that I would much rather see a founder with clean, simple legal documentation in place than a founder who delayed action because they were waiting to be able to pay a law firm for perfect legal work. This is where lean startup principles apply to legal structure. You iterate your product, you test your market, you move quickly. Your startup's legal foundation should follow the same philosophy. Put reasonable structure in place early. Improve it as the company grows and when the risks become greater. Because the real risk is not imperfect documentation. The real risk is no documentation. You don't need expensive legal perfection on day one. You do need ownership clarity for your startup. Build fast, but build on a clean legal foundation. Here's some practical and actionable steps to prevent startup founders from falling into the startup IP ownership trap. Before meaningful technical or product development at your startup begins, make sure everyone who is contributing assigns their intellectual property rights to the company in writing. That includes co-founders, technical advisors, contractors, early engineers, anyone who might be contributing to patentable innovation. Don't wait until you file a patent. Don't wait until you raise money. Don't wait until there's traction. Do it before the value exists. The document doesn't have to be complicated, but it does need to clearly state that any inventions, improvements, or patent rights developed in connection with the startup are assigned to the company. That one step changes everything, because even if someone leaves later, and even if relationships sour, the company owns the rights. With such documentation, there's no ambiguity, no surprise co-ownership, no scrambling during due diligence. The takeaway for founders is that if you are building a startup right now, ensuring that divided ownership of your technology or products will not occur is not something to put on a future to-do list. Ownership issues are inevitable if you don't create the right documentation as one of your first steps as a founder. And once they exist, ownership issues will not fix themselves. They will also likely be out of sight, out of mind until you get to investor due diligence. And when that happens, it may be too late to fix the problem. Or if you can fix it, it may cost you lots more to do so, either in legal costs or by having to award equity to someone who left the company a long time ago and has not contributed to the value that you have built since. It should now be clear that every day you build your startup's technology or products without clear IP ownership documentation is a day you may be creating risk that can destroy your company's chance of success. Investors will see unclear ownership as unacceptable risk. Acquirers will walk away if they can't be sure that their competitors will also be able to practice the tech or products that your startup developed. And by the time they do, it's too late to wish you had handled it earlier. To succeed as a startup founder, you have to be able to say, the company owns all of our IP. Here's the paperwork to prove it. I hope you learned today how to avoid your startup falling into the startup IP ownership trap. If you want more practical, founder-focused tools and guidance on how to build real startup value by leveraging IP strategy, subscribe to Winning with Patents. That's where I share clear, actionable strategies you can implement immediately. Don't just build fast, build the right IP foundation. Subscribe to Winning with Patents and take control of your IP before your lack of control over IP ends up controlling your startup's outcome. I'll see you in the next one.